Welcome back to the Great Unfamous. As you may or may not know, we've been on hiatus for about the last year, and we're back in 2025, and we fired up with one guest I've tried to land for almost 3 years. This person taught me lessons no one else could teach me about the breathtaking beauty of Durango, Colorado, how to fly fish, and how you take on David and Goliath battles and win. Now, if this is your first time with us, you should know this is a podcast about exceptional people who left their mark on others, and then discovering often unfamous people who left a mark on them. But that's it. Lessons from remarkable givers and people who helped point them in the right direction. Now, there's many things to love about Mark Williams. He's a world-renowned fly fishing expert, author of more than 20 books, a sports writer, an award-winning alternative school teacher, a cancer survivor, a public speaker, an entrepreneur. The list goes on. But momentarily, you're going to hear the one skill I favor most, and that's his ability to tell a story. Because he has a razor-sharp wit and a silver-tongue Texas drawl, and he gets away with a lot. He does. In my book, he's kind of a cross between Odysseus and the fantastic Mr. Fox. He'll admit that, hey, I do ruffle feathers sometimes, but he's also the most entertaining cup of coffee you could hope for. So let's meet the man with a knack for tricking people into believing in themselves and learn how he acquired this talent. Welcome to the podcast, my dear friend. It's a bucket list item I can now proudly check off.
Jim, I was trying to figure out how many years we've known each other. It's at least been 30.
Yeah,
It was
at
in the
least.
early 90s. Yeah, that's a long time, my friend.
It is. It's a special day. It's a special day, to say the least.
Yeah, and we got to know each other through our wives.
We did. Our better halves, for sure.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks for joining. Well, look, I know we're not going to be able to cover all the ground of the amazing things that you've done and accomplished, but I want to jump right in with one of the things that stands out to me, and that was, as a teacher at the North Heights Alternative School in Amarillo, you said the most common and greatest compliment your students ever paid you was, "You saw me." Can you talk a little bit about that part of your career and how you reach kids in a way that most others couldn't?
Okay, I'm not unique. Each teacher brings their own, life experiences to the classroom. And I came to it late. Let me tell you how I got there. I was living in Dallas, Fort Worth, in the area where I knew you and we saw y'all all the time. And there was a situation where we had black ice, and it took me, I worked downtown. We had a family business, graphic engraving, and it took me 6 hours to get 18 miles on black ice. And, traffic is bad enough then. It usually took 2 hours. And I walked in and told Amy, I can't do this anymore. I'm 40 and I want to do something different. And I've taught at college, but I've always wanted to teach high school. I think I want to teach. Let's move. And she knows me well enough to know that if I say that, I'm pretty darn serious about it. She's from Amarillo. I got a job. We sold our town home. She got a job in Amarillo, and I didn't have one yet. We were in the car on the way to Amarillo, moving there. And I had two principals call me and offer me jobs. And they were each in the poverty-stricken part of town and were from middle schools, not high school. And I would teach social studies, which I wasn't certified for. I was certified for English. I thought, yeah, this sounds like a perfect challenge. I'll take it. So my very first day at Travis Middle School, I had no idea about this. Even to this day, it still boggles my mind. But I turned my back to this 30 kids out there and started to write my name up on the board and heard a commotion. And it was two girls fighting. I didn't even know girls fought. And I went to nobody gave me any preparation or advice or anything. So I just went over there and tried pulling them apart. Well, I got a hold of Dolores pretty good and I had both her arms wrapped up. But Esmeralda, I only had one arm wrapped up and she was able to keep that thing going and pumping her fist into Dolores's face. her nose broke, blood splattered all over me. I dropped my coffee. I had blood all over my brand new khakis and new shoes, my new teacher shoes. And I thought then and there, maybe I've made a mistake.
That's right.
Yeah. So it was an interesting experience teaching at-risk, low-income students. I had never done that. I had the benefit of growing up white privileged middle class. So it really enlightened me. I didn't know about the challenges that other people faced of having the kind of broken homes and poverty cycles that these kids, it's not their fault that they go through. So when you sit there and ask a kid, why didn't you bring a pencil? Well, perhaps they have a mother who's a drug addict and it's their job to get their two other brothers dressed and ready for school, and their mom can't drive that day, and so they have to get an uncle to come do it, and they're late, and they spent all last night worrying about things other than the next day of school. And it really opened my eyes. So I remember too, I wanted to play forceful one day. I lost control of this one kid, and I could watch him. I was going to tear him a new one. He was at the back of the class, screwing around, drawing, wasn't paying attention. How's he going to learn? How's he going to become anything? So class is over, the bell rings, and Jaime starts walking out. Jaime, come here. Yes, sir. I go, what are you doing back there? What are you drawing? He says, well, I'm not through with it exactly. I said, well, let me see it. And I'm ready to tear into this kid. And he holds it up, and it's a picture of he and me. And our hands are held up, and there's a sun. It's a rudimentary drawing, and it's in the background. He goes, you make me want to do better. And I was about to tear him a new one. And it just opened my eyes that maybe I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Maybe I'm not reaching these kids in a way that they need to be reached. I'm reaching them in the way that I want them to be reached. So the next year I moved over to high school to alternative ed. And what that meant was that for the 4 main high schools in Amarillo, kids who flunked classes, hit teachers, got caught with drugs, skipped too much, whatever the at-risk reason was, they went over to North Heights to kind of get their lives in order. So our goal was not to do the same thing that they'd been having done to them in these traditional schools. They didn't fit a traditional system. They weren't learning in a traditional model. I was lucky enough to have Mark Leach, who's one of the influences in my life, as my principal. And what he did was he said, let's create an environment that is individualistic and differentiates to their needs. What is this child who's coming into our room? What do they need? What can we do to make them learn better, to make their lives better? What can we do to form a learning partnership with them so that even after they leave, they can still rely on us? They've given us the trust. They're giving us the power to shape them. What are we going to do for them after even? We're just going to, no, I don't know you any longer. I'm not. No, that's not it at all. So when you mentioned that one of the greatest things that I found that students saw in me and other teachers at North Heights was you saw me. What that means was I might have a young man who's fiercely Hispanic. He doesn't want to be at school. All he thinks about is buying a truck and getting a good job. He doesn't want to be at school. Okay, what I could do is do what his traditional teachers did. Here's Shakespeare. Read it and do a report. Okay, this kid doesn't like Shakespeare. He's not going to read. He doesn't respect me. He doesn't understand how this helps his life in any way. But what I could do is delay that for a while and hope I get there down the road. But why don't I get to know the young man? Why don't I ask what his fears are, what his dreams are, who he listens to? I'll tell you, over the 20 years that I taught at North Heights, I learned more about country music and rap music and screamo music and all kinds of music I had no interest in listening to, because that was the number one way to get a kid to go, huh? Really? Okay. You listen to that? And I mean, I did. I would go, because you know what happened to Travis? One kid asked me, says, do you like country music? I said, no, it sucks. He goes, oh, so you do listen to it? I said, no. He goes, well, then how do you know? And that stuck with me. Even to this day, I'm not going to criticize something unless I know. And so for those young men and those young women that I taught, they might talk about something in their lives. Like, for instance, one of them used to recite poetry, slam poetry at the local coffee house. Well, I felt it my job then to go listen to them on the night I knew they were going to be doing slam poetry. What better way to reach that kid so when she comes in the next morning, I've already got her respect. I'm building a relationship. She wants to do something for me. So it wasn't what you and I grew up with, where we had an authority-laden, top-down sort of system. where the teacher was the end all. I'm going to be a model. I'm going to be a counselor. I'm going to be an advisor. I'm going to be a number of things for this student, a resource. But one thing I've got to do to something that's not working in the traditional system for them is I have to empower them to learn on their own, to make mistakes. I want to encourage them to do failure things. I want them to reach for things. And so in my English room, I had a studio built. We got private money. We had a studio built. So we did documentaries. We built apps. We were the first professional app in America by high school students. What it was, we had 300 students put it together, and it was where to sleep, eat, and play in Amarillo, Texas, because we're a thoroughfare. We're a crossroads. I-40 goes to everywhere in the West. And those kids took 2 years to do it. It was on the iTunes store, and all the monies went back into scholarships for them. It was amazing. And they were in charge of it. And it's not like they in charge of it like you had when teachers would say, I'm putting you in charge of this, Jim Thompson, and then they'd really tell you how to do it. Well, then what good is that? These kids failed. And sometimes they'd kind of go, why do we fail? Well, let's talk about it. What do you think it was? It was that old psychiatrist trick, right? And so over the years, what happened was we created culture, which you want to do in any sort of setting, right? In your own household, in your business, whatever it happens to be. And the culture was that it was self-perpetuating. We would have students that were there the year before. And when new students came in, I no longer had to give the pep talk. I no longer had to tell them the rules. The students policed themselves because they were proud of this institution. They were proud of who they were becoming. And that act of becoming, that existentialism, is the key to any alternative education resource. How do I make you want to be better than you are and to continue to be better than you are? And better means any number of things. Better might simply mean graduating. Some of these kids had never had anyone in their family graduate. Some of these kids had drug addictions. Maybe the act of becoming was no longer being a drug addict. So there was a number of ways to measure success other than A, B, C, or graduation. And my role and my other teachers' roles there, and Mark Leach's role as principal, was to foster and empower these students. And it's still the best experience I've ever had. Now, I hated that cancer took me away from having to retire at 59 from that because I'd still be doing it.
Well, you talk about the impact that people have and the impact that you have. That story of you getting ready to shred a young man for not paying attention to class, and he's drawing a picture of you. That's having your eyes open to like what success looks like.
Yes.
So, and you mentioned this too, which is around failure. So like, one of the things that I've always believed in is that there's some things in life you cannot accomplish without failing at it multiple times.
Yes.
The problem is most people don't have the stomach for repeated failure. So in that setting, like, how do you communicate the value of failure to at-risk teens whose primary goal is probably just to fit in and not be embarrassed?
Yes.
How do you convince them the value of failure?
There's no singular way, but talking about that culture, one of the great things we established a few years of this, students, I might have a student, let's say you're Jim Thompson, you've been kicked out of Amarillo High and you're sitting in there and we've talked about it and you like Pink Floyd and one day you want to be a barber. Well, I'm not immediately going to give you something that's a menial task that you'll recognize as menial. I want to give you something that might be interesting. Have you ever thought about opening your own barbershop? Okay, good. Have you ever thought about, do you know anything about creating a business plan on it? What it would look like? How much it's going to cost you? What is a chair? Are you going to rent out a chair? How does all that work? And then I'm going to have you go talk to some barbershops. And I'm going to go have you talk to a banker. And before long, you're going to be putting together a business plan that is actually a real business plan that you can see. And you're going to fail along the way. But when you go talk to these other people, they're going to instruct you, yeah, you almost had it. That was good. That was a good failure right there, because there's good failures. And so what I want you to do is try this, go back and try this and come back. And so now I had a whole community network that this one Jim Thompson who wants to be a barber was now involved with. And then the great thing about culture, you would have to come back and you weren't just going to tell me about it. I wasn't just going to give it a grade. No, you needed to present it to me and a lot of the students who were interested. If you weren't interested, sit over there and do your project. If you were, come on. And I'm going to ask you questions and the kids are going to ask you questions. How much are you going to charge me on my kind of hair? And how are you going to do this? Are you going to have liquor there? I've seen some that, and all of a sudden you get more ideas. You go, I can't give you the project right now. I'm going to go back and work on it some more. I'll come back in a couple of days. And that's what it became with almost everything there. So eventually I would trick you into reading a book, maybe on how to start your own business. But before long, I might have you reading The Magus by John Fowles, or before long, I might have you reading a history book. Um, and I might put you on the Middle Ages so you learn about what barbers were back then. And before long, we've built a learning partnership, and you understand that the learning process is much more important than the things you learned, and that you always want to be a learner, and that the things I'm teaching you, think about this, Jim. If you think back to your favorite teachers, do you remember any formula they taught you? Do you remember any line they taught you? No. You remember how they made you feel and what they imparted. And so that's when I got cancer and I put it up there on Facebook, and I had thousands of my students get on, and they said, one thing, I feel bad for you, Mr. Williams, but you always had our back, and now it's time for us to have yours. And one of the great things you did back in the day, I really honestly don't remember what you taught me, but I remember this: you saw who I was, you saw me, and you validated me, and you made me feel as though I was worth your time and my own time to be able to try to become something. And that's not a magic gift. It takes work. It takes building relationships. There was a lot of nights I'd go home frustrated and upset that I hadn't reached a kid, and I learned patience through it. And I learned that okay, that didn't work. I'm failing now. What can I do to use good failure to reach this student? And I learned, you know what? It's never just on me. It was on that whole class. Sometimes the best lessons I watched were another student teaching another student. That was the beautiful thing. And I think it could be like that in life. That was just a microcosm of what it should be like in the real world. And it can be, and sometimes it is. When it's beautiful, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. You see it. You see it, and you see flashes of it.
Do I need to expand on that more? Does that make sense?
No, it makes 100% sense. And you already hit on the next question, which what I was going to say was, of all those kids you taught, what did they teach you? But is there anything you want to elaborate on that?
I even wrote that on when kids comment, was that y'all taught me more than I ever taught y'all. I was 40 through 60 when I was teaching them. And as you know, there's a trap we all get into, thinking we've learned enough, or we know enough, or we know a lot. And there's nothing more refreshing and more earth shattering than having a 17-year-old call you out on your bullshit. They call you out on your BS and your narrow myopic views and your closed systems and your generational thinking, because every generation thinks, oh, this new generation, they're never going to be as good as us. Well, I got on a speaking tour talking about Generation Y, the millennials, and Gen Zs, because they were showing me that they had, but I'll give you an example. When I graduated high school and went to college, I didn't know just a whole bunch. I found out when I got to college. College was a big learning experience academically. What I found when I was teaching 9th through 12th graders, they knew as much in 9th grade as I did when I went to college. That learning was so much farther advanced, mathematically, science, history, all that they came in already having a bigger base than I had. And I was pretty smart, but these kids come in and it's been laid out for them better. They have a better foundation. Where there were gaps they caught on that homework sometimes was BS. They caught on sometimes that pop tests aren't always fair. They caught on that tests don't always, they're quantification, but they don't always measure qualification. They caught on to all this, and they were a smart enough generation because they grew up on TV and digital age and so on, that they weren't going to fall for it. That taught me something. Okay, why can't I incorporate that in my life? Why can't I re-examine some of the things I hold dear? Why can't I look at some of the tenets that I thought that were proven and absolute? Maybe they're not. Maybe I need to re-examine and reassess. And I did. I think I'm a lot smarter the last 20 years than I was the previous 40, because I'm in constant state of re-examination, reinvention. And those kids taught me that. And, also I taught every kind of kid you can think of, from a goth to a star athlete to a eventual Rhodes Scholar to everything you can think of. And their successes taught me the success that I always used to do, which was, I got a book published, I made this money, I did this, and all these goals and objectives. It wasn't a really good measure of success. I was just checking a list. Did I, when I saw this homeless person, because there's nobody better at giving than poor people, when I saw this homeless person, Did I do something that might help that person in that day or in their life? Did I continue to do that, or did I just want a cherry on top? Who do I want to be? I thought I knew how I wanted to be. When I'm watching these kids grow into these things that they never thought they could be, maybe I need to look and see on what I could be. It's a gallimaufry of things they taught me that would take 1,000 years to tell you about. I can just tell you, they taught me the value of reexamination.
That's huge.
It's huge.
That
Absolutely.
is huge. The ability
Yeah.
to reassess and
Yeah.
be self-aware and
Yes.
continue to
Have
improve.
a consciousness about life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, Mark, you know, most of my guests have to research pretty in great detail, but I didn't skip that with you because I figured there's a lot of things I don't know. I think I know everything about you, but I bet there's plenty that I don't. And so, as I go through that research process, one of the things that I did notice is a trend is your ability to convince people that they can do more than they think. So with that in mind, did you ever think that your life could depend on your ability to trick yourself into
Absolutely.
thinking that you could beat cancer?
Yeah. The con game begins with sort of a cognitive dissonance, right? Where you know the problem, but you only think you're solving it. You have to trick yourself into solving it. I've always kind of done that. And I don't know if it's innate. I don't know if it's something because my family moved. I lived 44 places before I ever got into college. We'd moved around so much. And so you learn to be sort of a social chameleon when you first hit a joint. That's an interesting question. Yeah. No, there's a con man aspect to it, isn't there? There really is. One of the things I'm most proud of is I went into the back door in professional writing, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But that I've helped so many other people get into writing, and it's not that I did it; it's that they did it because everybody's got a book inside of them. Everybody wants to write an article. Everybody wants to write a book. The hardest part is writing the book, and so I've always seen it as one of the one of my greatest experiences ever is sitting down and writing a book and finishing a book. I love the process. It is meditative, it's illustrative, it's everything you can think. I love doing it. And so I always wanted to share that with other people. So it's the joy of them getting to do it and then reflecting back to me. "Oh, thanks for driving me, thanks for pushing me." But I always make them a deal. It's the same deal I made with my kids. If you don't do the same thing, if you're not networking out and doing this for more people and trying to help them get published, trying to help them start their own business, which I do, trying to help them, whatever it is they think they can't do, but they want to do, then I don't want to help you. I want you to, as Cormac McCarthy says in The Road, I want you to pass the fire. It's huge for me. If there's no social reason for any of this, if there's no connectivity to any of this, it's all hollow and artificial. I want authenticity. Yeah, I don't sit here and checklist the 50 people, 100 people I've helped get into writing or anything else. No, we have a shared experience now. I've just created more family. And so I do it out of that. I do it because it's reflective, because I learn as much helping them as once again, it's this two-way highway system of learning. I get as much out of learning from them. There's a young lady, Nikki Rockefeller, who approached me in her early 30s, and she wanted to write a memoir. And she sent me the first chapter. It was the best thing I'd ever written. And I'm talking ever. I'd never read anything that had such control, that emoted so many feelings, that just so perfect. So the next 6 months, every night, she would send me the next chapter. She spent that day writing that chapter, and we got through, and we finished it was a memoir, but it read sort of like Running with Scissors by Edgar Burroughs, or whatever his name is. It read like Running with Scissors, where it felt like a novel. You felt and you empathized, and you shuddered at the things that happened to her. And we've sent it off to an agent, and she's going to get published, and I'm not going to be able to say, "Hey, I helped with that." No, the value of me. She caused me then to get back into writing novels. All I'd written for 20, 30 years was nonfiction. I'd written sports articles, travel books, fishing books, weather books, things like that. She inspired me to get back into writing through her structural choices, through her voices, through choices she made in her memoir. I thought, I bet I can do that, but in a different way. And so there's always this symbiotic relationship I have with anybody that I help in this con game you're talking about, because it is kind of a con game on me. I guess in a way it's selfish in that I'm looking to help you so that you can help me. I
Well,
think
that
you and I had that to start with. If you think about it, you took a chance on a fledgling sports writer who had tricked his way into the business. You would look back at magazines. I had a sports card business, but let's be honest, there was a lot of people that started sports card businesses back in
oh
1992,
yeah,
right? 89, 92, or in that range. And you let me write for the premier sports card business in the world. It was pretty fun to do. Yeah. And that helped you out too.
it did.
So there was a symbiosis to it all.
Well,
Did I ever
that's
tell you how I got into that? Go ahead.
say that again.
Did I ever tell you how I got into sports writing?
No, no,
The
tell me.
con man game. So I lived in Puerto Rico for 4 years and spoke Puerto Rican Spanish. At that time, the two main players on the Texas Rangers, where I was living in Dallas, Texas, were Juan Gonzalez and Pudge Rodriguez, both from Puerto Rico. And I thought, how can I get into sports writing? I want to write about these guys. I bet I could bring out some Puerto Rican thing and it could really be good. So I called up the Texas Rangers one day. I got the nerve to do it. I called them up. I said, I'm a sports writer with Sport Magazine. I was not a sports writer with Sport Magazine. I said, I'd like to interview Juan and Pudge. And they go, okay, hold on just a minute, please. I got to the next person. His name was Luis Mayoral. He was from Puerto Rico, and they had hired him to be the Hispanic handler for all Latin American ball players because Texas had Sammy Sosa and quite a Rafael Palmeiro and quite a few other Latin American ball players in their system. And Luis says, can you be out here at 2 p.m. today? Yes, I can. So for the next week and a half, I didn't even have questions or anything. I would go out there at 2 o'clock when they would take the field, do batting practice, sit in the clubhouse and talk and everything. And I got to know Juan and Pudge, and we'd talk about Puerto Rico. We didn't even talk baseball. We were talking about empanadas and the playas, and we were talking about all this stuff. And they were like, man, it's so good to meet someone who knows Puerto Rico and all this kind of stuff. And then the last few days, I kind of had gotten my question, found my groove, asked them all the right questions. I spent the next month writing a 5,000 word article on these two young and emerging stars. And I called up Sport Magazine and I said, hey, I've got this article for you that's exclusive on Juan Gonzalez and Pudge Rodriguez. And they bought it. And that's how I got to be in sports writing.
That's Mark Williams. That's the fantastic Mr. Fox that I'm talking.
Well, the conventional rules I always thought didn't have to apply. That was for everybody else. I didn't want to do it that way. So you may not even know this. I did Spanish broadcasting for part of a year with the Texas Rangers. So Luis is also the voice on the radio, and their guy got sick for several months. And Luis says, hey, you speak passable Spanish. You want to come on and be the color man? Sure. So I'm terrible at it. I'm not as good at Spanish. And so Luis picks up my slack. And then one day, this is when they used to open up the windows. This is in late June. And there's all these June bugs. Remember how bad the June bugs were in Arlington?
Oh, yeah.
And all these bugs are in there. Ay, Dios mío, hay muchos bichos en este cuarto. I think I have just said, and I have in Puerto Rican Spanish, I've said, oh my goodness, there's all these insects in this room. Bichos means insects. And all of a sudden we get a phone call from the producer who's back at the radio headquarters. He's going, I'm getting calls from everywhere. Costa Rica, all over this. What are y'all talking about in there? And we told him, he goes, no, you idiots. Bichos only means insects in Puerto Rico. In all the other Hispanic countries, it means penis. They didn't ask me back the next year.
But that's you don't get the opportunity to tell that story without putting yourself out there.
Yeah, I am not afraid to do either one of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark. I mean, it's funny. You talk about that and you think about that symbiotic relationship of like you helping people, but I'm not going to help you unless you're going to not only help yourself, but you're going to help others. But you think about what that cycle creates, and that's kind of what this podcast is all about.
Yes.
Because yeah, I want you to think about the impact that you've had on people, but I also want you to think about the impact that people have had on you. And that little soul searching, if everybody does that, it opens up a number of amazing things that happen. One is that you finally take some time to recognize and not beat yourself up about some of the things that you've done and some of the things you've accomplished. You recognize people who helped you along the way, who the vast majority of us never take the time to mention or tell.
Right.
And when
We
we
don't all win
do,
Oscars and get up there and thank them, right? Yeah.
yeah. Well, and since we don't win Oscars, do you know when we mention it? We mention it at the funeral.
When they
That's
die.
when we mention
That's
it.
the only
We're
time.
like, oh, yeah, this
Yeah.
guy was really helpful to me. You know what would have been great if you'd actually taken 10 minutes to tell that teacher what you thought of him when he was around.
I
And
tried
so,
doing that recently, and he's dead, and I feel bad about it. So when I was a senior at Longview High School in East Texas, I had always been the gold star writer kid who wrote weird stuff, but the teachers were impressed by, and A plus excellent imagery and all that kind of stuff. And I was a good writer, but I wasn't a good enough writer. And so I got this University of Texas PhD who was teaching high school English in Longview, Texas, of all places, and we write for him, and I'm just going to blow his socks off, and I write and I write, and I turn it in, and we get it back the next day, and it's D, a D. I'd never made a D. I'd never made a B. I made a D. He goes, come see me. So I came and saw him. I go, obviously you don't know who I am. I'm Mark Williams. He goes, read that first paragraph for me, and I read it. And he goes, okay, read the second one. I read it out loud. He goes, what does it mean? He goes, well, I'm setting the tone. I said, okay, so what does it mean? As a reader, what am I supposed to convey out of this? And I read the third thing, and I was still setting it up. And it hit me. He was so right. And it changed me as a writer from that day on, that I needed to write with clarity and purpose and not just to stroke and hear words and so on, right? So I thought about that, and I'd forgotten about it for years. And I reached out over the last few years, and he'd already passed away. And I wanted to tell him, dude, you reached me in a way that, look, I've done 20 books and 1,000 articles, and you're the reason why. You made me, and I feel bad that I missed out on that. So you're exactly right. At funerals is when we do it.
yeah. But again, you don't have to lament the people you didn't talk to. What you do need to do is think about the people that are still here right now.
Yeah. And I want to be fair. I have, even though I've lost some influences in my life, I was very clear. I'm almost too clear in telling people I love them and how much they mean to me and why they meant something to me. Like to think that I've communicated with you why you're meaningful. But there's some that have passed, and there's some that are alive that I'd love to share with you.
I would love to hear them. And right before we do that, I thought I'd missed you. I thought I'd missed my opportunity with you, and I kicked myself for many a year for like, you stupid son of a bitch, you missed it. You should have gotten with Mark when you had the chance, and you didn't do it. And so I just want to tell you, that's why I'm so excited to have you on here, and we're going to talk about your what you overcame. I want to get back to that, but
The small cancer
let's go
journey.
back and talk to the people that have impacted you and the people that are still around and those that aren't.
So when I thought about this, knowing you would ask this, I look at my Weltanschauung, my worldview, this long developed worldview that's constantly changing, it's in flux, and thought that people that influenced me weren't always positive. Sometimes people have negative influences that shaped me. And I'll start with my stepdad. I call him my stepdad. He's my dad. My real biological dad left when I was 6, and he was a horrible human being. This Vietnam veteran, Texas A&M engineering, John Wayne, not talk very much kind of guy, came into my life and became my dad. And he raised me and my brother and sister. He made a great life for us. He taught us lessons. But imagine this. I'm a lot to deal with. And I was a lot to deal with at 6 and 10 and 15 and 18, being contrarian and articulate. And dad was not especially so. Dad was very black and white and straightforward. Actions speak louder than words, and so on. He was a great human being and a very influential human being outside of the house. Inside, he didn't know what the hell to do with me. And so he was stern and punitive and draconian. And it just didn't work between us. Years later, I got my first book deal. It was a fishing book. I signed, it was an amazing deal. I signed the worst contract in the history of books. I got $500 up front with no money ever to come my way again, no matter how many they sold. And they sold quite a bit, but I didn't know what I was doing. But I got a book contract. And Dad was proud of that, sort of. He didn't think I should be a writer. He wanted me to go and be an engineer like him. instead of an English major. Well, the third book, I'd already gotten an agent, and I got $15,000 from Simon and Schuster to do a fly fishing book. This is 92, 15,000 bucks up front. Oh my gosh. I call him up. I'm so proud. He goes, let me ask you this. Is it another fishing book? I go, yeah. He goes, get back on me when you write a real book, and hung up on me. And that was his way of this kind of 1960s stern conservative kind of guy way to say, I'm going to push you. He's not an attaboy. I'm going to push you and you'll respond in kind. And I did, and it worked. I didn't see it. I didn't know that's what he was doing all these years. And it wasn't like he was playing chess and I was playing checkers. He was playing checkers. It's just a different game of checkers than what I was playing. We weren't on the same board. So years go by, and he's 62, and he gets cancer. Dad has been an engineer, and he built power plants, and then he formed his own business. He was a general contractor, was very successful, became rich. He built shopping centers, apartments, malls, anything you could build. He loved it. It's what he lived for. He even had me come there for a year and try to work for him, and it didn't work. So he's 62, and he's on his deathbed for a year, and we go down there. I stay with him most of the time, and we write a book together. He wants to write a book finally. And we write the only books he knows are the Bible and Louis L'Amour. So I can't write the Bible with you, but we can write a Louis L'Amour. And we wrote every day. I would sit there with my computer, and he would dictate things, and I would turn it into chapters. And it was a Louis L'Amour where a dad had moved his family out to Colorado in the 1860s. Indians had kidnapped the kids and killed the mom, and they had taken the kids to assimilate them into their camp. The dad, who's a greenhorn, goes and saves the kid, but is mortally wounded and dies saving the kids. We get to the last chapter. He dies. And so I've got this great book that I have yet to finish, where I talk about our lives, and through the sinew of the book is the Louis L'Amour book we write, and it all comes together and coalesces at the end whenever he saves the kids and dies. So he has me, of all people, do his eulogy to 1,500 people spilling out of the church auditorium. And at the end of it, he does something so cruel and so beautiful. He hands me a letter, or he has my mother hand me a letter that he's handwritten in his cancer scrawl. And it says, Mark, I never understood you. You intimidated me. I always wanted to be like you, and I didn't know how. This is my dad, John Wayne, telling me this. He goes, and I hope I don't break up, because I always do whenever I tell this. It said, I know how much you love being out in the outdoors, and I want you, when you look up, to know that I'm there with you. You took me fishing once, and I didn't get it, but I'm there with you, and I love you, and I wish I could have done more for you. I wish I could have understood you better. That's not fair. So I hated him for that. Dad, we had this chance all these years. Why didn't you tell me this? Why couldn't you communicate this? As a 64-year-old man, the way that I'm going to finish that book now is, wait, I'm the great communicator. I'm the con man. I'm the manipulator. Why didn't I do something? Why didn't I do more? Why did I punish him for being so strict and constrained? And I did. When we went into his office, he had a huge office in his own building. After he died, we went in there to collect his things. And on one long wall, I mean, this wall is like 30 foot long. It's the wall of Mark D. Williams. Anything I'd ever written, printed, covers of books were framed. I mean, 40, 50 things on his wall, all me.
You'd never seen that?
I didn't go see him because we had such a horrible relationship.
Yeah.
And so I broke down. I thought, that's what I'm talking about in this sense of networking, communication, modeling for others. And we had it in a weird way, but we had this blockage in between where we didn't know what the other one was doing. It would have been beautiful had that ever been removed. And I never even thought once about going on a vacation with him. And he didn't think about going on with me. He wanted to get to the top of Pikes Peak and measure how tall it was and get back down with a speed record. I wanted to go up there and see the history and the fauna and fish and everything else. But it would have been beautiful if we could have met in the middle occasionally. And we didn't until I read that letter. So Gary was a huge influence. I mean, to his credit as being a father, even though we fought, even came to blows several times, I never once even thought about saying, you're not my real dad, because he was. All right. Another influence. I got to college and I was out of control. My dad and mom had been very constricting, and everything was, no, you can't do that, and you don't want to do that. I got to college and I wanted to do that. I wanted to do all that, so I did. So it took me a long time to get through college. I spent 6 years being an undergraduate. I spent a few years in law school and a few years in graduate school. I went 10 years to school, but it wasn't until I got to McMurray College. So I'd flunked out of several schools, 7 schools. And Dad's, well, I went to go join the Navy. I can't do this. Here I am supposed to be this golden child, and I can't do it. I screw it up every time. So I called Dad and I said, Dad, I'm fixing to go in and swear in. I just thought I'd let you know. He goes, wait right there. And he came down to the building where they were, and he pulled me out, and they were mad at him for pulling me out. And he sat down. I was going to be in the Air Force, and he got me a better deal to go and be on a nuclear submarine for 6 years, which I'm not sure that's a better deal. I don't know how to swim. But anyway, he turned to me, he goes, look, why don't you just give it one last try? I got this thing in the mail. Here it is. As a matter of fact, it's McMurray College. It's a private Methodist college in Abilene. You'll be away from everything. There's not a lot of partying. Give it one more try. What do you say? Okay. When I got there, I met Dr. Gerald McDaniel, Dr. Paul Lack, and Dr. Bill Monroe. I was an older student. I was 22, 23 then. I was married. And they saw the potential in me, like I was the at-risk kid. And they fostered it in me. I was taking by the second term, I was taking 24 to 25 hours a semester. That's a lot.
Those like credit hours.
Couldn't get enough. I was 24/7. I was an eating, breathing, learning machine. And so I would hang with these professors. These are all 40, 50-year-old men with PhDs from University of Texas and all kind of great places, University of Chicago. And why they were at McMurray, I couldn't figure out, because they had written books and they knew famous people, and they were just so erudite. And I wanted to be them. That's who I wanted to be. So I was a sponge, and I challenged them. And I would go in, if I went into their study and I saw the books that were on their table reading, I would go buy those, and then I would go buy some additional text to be able to challenge them. And it was this great game we played of Plato and Aristotle, and we just kept on scaffolding each other. And I remember one thing they did was they were big on, okay, so you know it, now what? And that was a thing I'd gotten real good at, learning about the social gospel in the late 1800s. And they said, why don't you write about it? So I researched, and for my term paper, I did the social gospel in Abilene, Texas, from 1888 to 1920. It is not a very fun paper to read, but they submitted it to the West Texas Historical Quarterly, and it was the first place I ever got published. Then they set me up in Baylor, and I had to go present it at a conference. That's what they did to challenge me. That's where I learned the idea of teaching, which is to empower, to challenge, to provide opportunities for more. And they did that for me. Dr. McDaniel was who I call my mentor, but Dr. Bill Monroe and Dr. Paul Lack could easily just be in that. And I kept in touch with them, and I still do. Dr. Monroe, he's been the honors professor down at University of Houston for years, and I've gone and spoken to his groups and so on. Dr. McDaniel unfortunately died, but he knew. He was my editor for a couple of books. He was so proud when I published. And I really respect everything that they did, because I wasn't easy to deal with. I wanted to argue about everything, and that's one of the beauties of college. You can do that, and it's healthy. In life, it's not quite as healthy. So yeah. So my professors at McMurray, that was pretty special. We even did an academic bowl where we challenged the two rival schools in Abilene, Hardin-Simmons and Abilene Christian. And we charged them. It's like a quiz bowl, like a trivia bowl, of academics. And I'll tell this very quickly. So we would practice, me and the other three. I was the team captain. And the way it would work is you would get a question right. They'd ask you a question, you'd buzz in, you get it right. And they'd then ask you a choice where you could talk to your other teammates. And then I would give you the answer. Well, we're behind against Abilene Christian, and they're showing it on local TV. This is on local TV. And we're making a comeback, but we need everything to go our way. It's got to be right. So the other team buzzes in and beats us, and the question goes to them. Now, if they get it wrong, it comes back to us. They show a slide of a particular painting, and they ask who the artist is. Well, one of the things you do whenever, like, so for instance, let's say the answer is Jim Thompson, and my teammates might go, say Jim Thompson, say Jim Thompson. Okay, Jim Thompson. Yes, that's correct. Well, the picture was a Cezanne painting, and you can hear them. Everybody's got microphones on, and they're telling their captain, Cezanne, Cezanne. So he turns to the moderator and says, Zahn. No, I said Cezanne. I did Cezanne. McMurray, it goes to you. Cezanne. And you could just see his face melt. We went on to win by 2 points in the academic bowl. So that was my experience with those guys. It was pretty special. Yeah.
That's
I
amazing.
know. Yeah. And I promise you, everything I tell you is mostly true.
There's no fact check here, Mark.
No, good. Hey, you know something too? I thought about this as I was going through the influences. You were one of my first post-college adult male friends. And I didn't know men could be like you. So you were an influence. You don't realize it. I thought we needed to go out and drink heavy and smoke cigars and drive wild and do crazy things. And I'd never met anybody as deferential, as humble, as calm, as attentive. You actually listened. You would cogitate if I said something about like some shock value thing. You go, let me think about that for a minute. What do you mean? What do you think about? You're supposed to come back and we're supposed to argue. Come on, man. There was a thoughtfulness to you that was instructive over the years about what an adult male could look like. And I appreciate that. So that was pretty cool. So anyway, that was you as one of my influences.
Well, that's,
yeah.
I mean, the ability to connect with people, like, you know, Jen knows, my wife, Jen knows, like, I like to think. I'm a big thinker. I like to think about thinking, and it wears her out. So like when I show up at the barbecue and like, oh, here's my teaching friend Amy, and her husband Mark, I was like, hey Mark, how you doing? And then you start ripping off on like philosophy. I was like, ooh, all right, we can step things up here a bit. That's nice. So it was mutual, my friend.
Yeah.
You always made me think, and you always pushed me. And challenge me to do things that I probably wouldn't have done or thought about doing otherwise.
But I think that is one of my MOs, my modus operandi. I saw in you some things that if I pushed you, you could teach me. You know, I think the more we talk about symbiosis, the more you have mentioned it, though, I think it is very selfish. And I'm kind of, it's a good, like, you know, you talk about there's good trouble. Well, there's good selfishness too, right? Because I even think about your kids when we went to Durango and playing baseball and just watching them want to be like us. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
They saw what men were supposed to be like, and we tried to model that. And I know we were conscious of it, you know, and we were working so hard to teach them how to be a better baseball player than we ever were, you know, that kind of stuff.
I remember being out in that, we were up there and you were hitting ground balls to Will and Jack, and you were smoking them to Will. And you could see
better.
And you could see that like he was taking balls off the shins, and he was like, and he wouldn't stop. He's like, because Mark says this is what a baseball player does, and you're just smoking short hop after short hop into his shins. He's catching some of them, and some of them are just shooting off into the field. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the responsibility that you have, that we have. Yes. And that, you know, those professors that you talked about at college, those professors taught kids at North Heights.
Yes, they did.
But by working with you, they ended up teaching a whole generation of at-risk kids through you.
Yeah. Well, don't you think one of the dilemmas of becoming an adult in 20th and 21st century life in America and Western civilization is that mentoring ends at some point? So what we talked about was a tribe of people there. We had a like-minded tribe that was useful to each other. And it then multiplied out to other tribes. I think it's very valuable as a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old man to have had other tribes of friends like that. So for instance, I have a tribe here in Amarillo. I've had a tribe wherever I've gone. I've got Drew and Chad and Darren. We're like-minded, but all different. We come from different backgrounds, but very similar. But what we've done over the last 20 years of knowing each other through a group we call LSF, Liquid Smoke Forum, because we smoke cigars and drink whiskey and talk about everything, is we reinforce, we push, we cajole, we challenge, we support. And so when I've gone into my various gig economy businesses, or they've chosen to make a career choice, we're sounding boards, we're huggers, we're whatever the tribe needs, right? And I think that that's sometimes missing in adult males' lives, is that need for tribal affirmation.
Yeah. That connection. It's
That
human, right?
yeah, yes,
Humans can't function without that connection. And I think, I don't know, I think men in particular tend to think a lot of times it's not a priority. It's not that it's not important. It's just not a priority. You know, I got things I got
it
to
should
do,
be. It should
but
be.
it's the most important thing. It
Yeah.
is,
And some
it's,
people get it through church, some people get it through like a work type thing, but outside of that, where you can take vacations and it can be freer and more organic, that's when it's really valuable, at least to me. Something else I've done with influences. I find wherever I've been in stages of my life, I target someone I want to beat. And this is my own little game I play. So when I first started out in 1992, wanting to be the best fly fishing writer I could be, I targeted this guy named Craig Martin, who lived in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and he wrote Fly Fishing Northern New Mexico. And it was the preeminent guidebook. If you wanted to write a guidebook, this is how you did it. And he just looked cool, sounded cool, everything he did was cool, and I wanted to beat that, right? Then even when I so then I was in TOWA, Texas Outdoor Writers Association, and a friend of mine named Revis Wortham was the communications director for Garland Independent School District for years, and he retired at 61. And I was the writer at the time. I'd published all the books, and he came to me and asked, and we looked for an agent, and I really read his book. Man, you're really good. And went on and got an agent and published. And in his first book, it's a crime mystery novel, they compared him to Harper Lee of To Kill a Mockingbird.
wow.
I mean, why not retire then? What else are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
And he's gone on to write 3 series of books, and he's amazing at writing, and he wins the awards in New York Times bestseller. So he's my target now. I'm 64, and he caused me to write 4 novels over this last 2 years. He doesn't know it, and I will let him know it, but he was a target I had. And I had a target when I was doing the Texas Rangers, doing all the press and stuff. We'd be up in the press box when we'd play the Tigers. The Detroit Free Press sports guys would come down, and one of them was Mitch Albom. Now, Mitch won't remember me for anything. It's been 30 years, and I was just another guy. But I'd written books at that time, and he hadn't. And he would pick my brain. We'd eat the bad press box food and stuff like that, and we'd talk about writing. Well, he went on to write Tuesdays with
Yeah.
Maury and a number of other things, People You Meet in Heaven and all that. And so he was a target. So and I don't mean targeted in a negative way. I just mean targeted in something to aspire to. There's a model that I can follow. I'll still do it in my MDW way, but there's a target there. I like having a target, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then last but not least is my wife. You would ascribe to Jen who you are for a lot of things, right? They shape us in many ways that we don't even know. And Amy's done that for me, because when I met her at Texas A&M, and for a number of years after that, I was a wild man, and she's always supported me, but always reined me in when I needed it. She knows when and what I need when I don't. And to me, that's the biggest blessing of all, because I don't know what I need and when, and she does. So
I don't know if you want to talk about it or
hmm?
not, but I think
Nothing
we
else.
do need to touch on your cancer and your battle, because it's unlike anything I've ever heard. And it was personally inspiring for me in a lot of ways. I
Your
literally did
sister had
things.
cancer too, right?
What's that?
Your sister had 2 bouts with cancer, so you
Yep.
knew
Yep.
close
She's
hand
going through it
about.
right now.
Yeah.
But I would love to hear your story, because as I've heard it in the past, there are multiple places where I'm like, yeah, check, please. I'm done. Can you talk us through that, of what that was like, and how you chose to not ask for the check?
I was in great shape through my 40s and 50s. I hiked. If we went fishing, as you know, I could hike up a stream 10 miles and come back that day and be ready the next day. I wanted to stay in good shape. And then somewhere in my early 50s, I started having intestinal issues and weird pains and stuff. I don't go to the doctor. I'm scared to death of shots. I'm scared to death of anything that maims the skin, knives, IVs, you name it. So I didn't go for 10 years. Well, then things were really happening weird. I was getting dizzy and I would get flushed and I would just feel my heart beating so fast. And I thought, okay, fine, I'll go to the doctor. Went to the doctor and I had my glucose was at 900. Well, a normal person is, like, I don't even know what it is, but mine wasn't. Mine was amplification force multiplier type. They said, we need to get you in the hospital tonight or you're going to die. And I thought, I'm not, is it going to be an IV? Yeah, it's going to be an IV. Well, then I'll come in the morning, but I'm not coming in tonight. If I'm going to die tonight, I'll die tonight. So I went in and they found out I had diabetes 1, like full on diabetes, not even diabetes 2. I went all in. So I had diabetes 1, and all of a sudden my life of hating needles. When I grew up, I was always sickly, and they used to have to chase me at the doctor's office. I even have a story about when I was 3 and they thought I had leukemia. They had to tie me with bed sheets down and hold me down so that they could scrape bone marrow out of my shin. That's the way they did the leukemia test back in the day. And so I'd always hated needles. And I had been in the hospital before, had eye surgery where I had a lazy eye and they corrected it. And I just hated needles. So all of a sudden I'm diabetic and I'm going to have to shoot up every day with insulin. This is my worst nightmare. And I did it. So for the first, you have to order these patches now that click into you and they stay on to you for a long time. But for the first few months, I had to have Amy shoot me every day and every night with insulin. And I would sweat and cry and get upset. I thought, I need to go to therapy for this. I'm going to die from the fear rather than the diabetes itself. So that was a challenge. And then I started getting gallstone attacks, and I went in, and my doctor, who's a close friend, I came back after the ultrasound, and he goes, Mark, this is not good. You have the hugest mass inside your torso. It's bigger than a grapefruit or bigger than a softball. It's hard to say because we didn't get, the full view of it. We need to get you in for an MRI and a biopsy tomorrow. But it did not look good. So I went home and told Amy. She's upset, but she knows after being with me for 30 years that I don't judge myself by my highs or my lows. Those are just simple everyday things. Let's sit and think about this, and we'll come up with something reasonable on the way we're going to present it. So I get the biopsy and they get the results back and they tell me, we'll be calling later to tell you if it's pancreatic cancer, in which case you've got maybe a month or 2 to live. Or it could be this certain kind of neuroendocrine cancer we don't know much about. It's very rare and unique, and we'll see which one it is. So as we sat on the bed waiting for the phone call, and Amy's upset, I thought it was kind of funny. It was almost like Schrodinger's cat. I was both dead and alive at that moment, depending on the phone call. I chose to do it this way. My former friend Mitch Albom's book, Tuesdays with Maury, we see Maury, who's facing ALS, and he wants to go dignified and noble and fight the good fight and be a model for everybody else. Well, I'd spent 20 years of my life teaching these kids to be strong and to be empowered and to have nobility in life and so on. It was my duty and responsibility. I was obligated to do nothing else than to be, I'm here for you. I'm going to show you what this is like. This is a journey we're all taking together. I'm not scared of dying. I'm scared of not living. I'm scared of not being able to do all the MDW things and have a million things going at once, but I'm not scared of dying. And I'm going to keep y'all informed of this as we go through the journey. We get the phone call. It's neuroendocrine cancer. And it has encased my pancreas, spleen, gallbladder, all the arteries and vessels, half the stomach. It's not good. So I go to MD Anderson. They do all kind of tests and everything, and they try 5 rounds of chemotherapy. My goodness, chemotherapy was not fun. I lost my fingerprints. Even to this day, I still have smooth fingerprints. So I would make a good criminal. It destroyed my skin. It aged me. It just was not any good. And so the hope was we could diminish the tumor by 33%. And in fact, it grew by about 10% during those 5 chemos. So that didn't work out so well. And so they didn't know what to do because there was no way to go in with the vascularity of it all being so encased and remove anything because I would bleed out. And I didn't want to die. So I committed to dying. And I told everybody that. I said, look, what's going to happen is everything's going to shut down. I could be out in the middle of a river. I could be at home. I could be anywhere. And it's just going to shut down and I'll bleed out and it'll be over. But I'm not going to go out without trying. So I'm writing books. I'm still traveling and fishing. I'm trying to do everything I can. And I didn't want to go out like my dad and my papa and Amy's dad, which was in diapers, laying in a bed, people fawning over you. Now, they did give me some instructions. They met it with humor and they met it with dignity, but I didn't want to be in a bed where people just talked about you thinking you can't hear them. I didn't want that. So 2 years go by, or a year and a half, and I get a phone call from MD Anderson. All right, we've got an idea. It's never been done before. It's a unique surgery. The odds are you're going to die on the table, but if we can get you through this, you can live a long and happy life, and neuroendocrine cancer isn't going to be the thing that kills you. Sure, I'm in. What do you got? Don't you want us to tell you about it? No, just tell me when to be there. I'm in. What I found out is this kind of living like this isn't living. I'm looking over my shoulder all the time. Let's face this thing head on. So I went down there, and what they decided to do was take my jugular vein from my neck, and they were going to reroute everything from the stomach and the heart and everything down there, and then remove all the bad vessels and everything bad that was all contaminated. And it was 14 hours on the table. They nearly lost me 3 times. We had 2 transfusions. And out of it, when I woke up the next day from where they'd taken the jugular vein, I have no hearing in my left ear, that it had affected the nerves, but I was alive and had got all of it out except for a tiny portion on the pancreas. They had to take most of the pancreas. A week later, they determined I was no longer diabetic, that my pancreas was creating insulin again. It had quit doing insulin. Now I was giving back insulin. 3 weeks go by and they're ready to let me go. They've never seen a recovery like this. I'm going to be on conferences. They're going to be talking about me, showing this new experiment, a new way to take advanced cancer of vascularity systems and make things right. When all hell broke loose, they found a leak in the sutures coming from the stomach, and it was leaking into the stomach. And from that point on, if it could go wrong, it did go wrong. So I was in MD Anderson for 6 months. I had a collapsed lung, had more tubes, hanging out of me than what you'd see in the movies. I had 24/7 nausea, which is not as good as it sounds. It's not as pleasant as it sounds. I could never throw up. And yet I felt that feeling right before you're like that. That's what I was 24/7. Then luckily after 45 days, that went away and I got the hiccups. For 24/7, I would hiccup, which doesn't sound that bad, but here's what happens. It syncopates occasionally, like once a day, with something in your throat and you can't breathe in, no matter what you do. So Amy would have to come and hit me as hard as she could on the back, which I don't think she totally minded, by the way. And she would hit me and pound until I could actually breathe. It would jar something and I would breathe. But I was constantly being scared. Then I had bile problems because I didn't have a gallbladder or spleen. So I was constantly throwing up bile. I could go on. There's a million other things. I went through a phase for a month where my blood pressure was like 50/40, 60/30, and I would just collapse. And I hit my head several times. They had to rush me to the hospital again because they were trying to let me live in an apartment just off the hospital to try to recuperate. I was on a food bag, so I hadn't eaten in 6 months. I did not eat food in my mouth for 6 months, just a food bag. So they finally send me home. I get home, and the way they did my stomach, they cut it in half, but the half that had the valve was gone. I have no valve. So everything that went into the stomach immediately flushed out. And they also took a few feet of the intestines. So it was going through fast. I was going to the restroom 40 times a day. That was on a good day, sometimes more. So I couldn't maintain nutritional value, and I got down to 112 pounds. Now, when I knew you, I was 170. My biggest, I was probably 195 or 200, and I was weighing 112 pounds. We took me into the gastroenterologist. I was all bones. I looked like a Holocaust victim, and he said, if we don't get him down to MD Anderson tomorrow, he won't have it tomorrow. So they did an air ambulance that night. I flew down. They did the food bag again. I was there for a couple months, and they sent me back home. And then for another 2 years, it was a gastrointestinal battle trying to figure out how to eat with half a stomach and maintain nutrition. I was flushing everything else so bad. I had kidney stones, anemia, you name it. And all through this, up until the last year, I was noble and dignified 20 hours out of 24. When everybody went to sleep, I'd cry. I was upset. I understood I was hurting other people. I couldn't figure out why. I'd always been able to control everything my entire life. Why couldn't I control this? That this is out of my realm. I can't believe this. And at one point, because it was probably in June, only a few months ago, when I had gone back into anemia and I couldn't walk across the room without having to stop, feeling so tired, they did iron blood infusions. And all of a sudden, I was able to eat. And all of a sudden, I was able to maintain. And I weigh 150 pounds now. And I've written 2 novels recently. And they're with my agent, and I'm very proud of them. Thank you, Rebswortham. I'm over it all. But in June was probably the lowest point where I thought to myself, how many cigars could I smoke a day in order to try to get something else that'll kill me? Because if I can't, I'm not scared of dying, but I'm scared of not living. And I'm back to living. And that was the hardest part for me because I couldn't read. I had foggy brain. I couldn't write. I sat in a chair or laid in a bed 24/7. And that was rough. I'm not going to lie. Amy would tell you a different story. She would tell you that the doctors told her several times that I was going to die. I know the first surgery I had, they didn't know I had neuroendocrine cancer. They just thought I had pancreatic cancer. And when they went in and they saw what they had, they came out and told a waiting room of everybody out there that's related to me, friend-wise or family-wise, he's got maybe a year. Y'all need to say your goodbyes. That's for other people, not for me. Come on. So it's been a 5-year journey. I embraced it. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I did it because I think I was properly prepared more than most. You know, you talk about like the first time we met and I've got philosophy and all that. No, my Weltanschauung was I want challenges. I'd never gotten to go to war. I'd never challenged myself facing death before. You know, I'd never been held up or shot or anything. I didn't have anything cool. So this was my way to face death and see how I was going to respond. And yeah, I'm kind of proud of myself. Yes, I was scared and I was a weenie at times and I backtracked. You know how you see those sometimes when a guy's drowning. God, I'll never drink again if you save me. Yeah, I did a lot of that. There was a lot of backtracking. But in the end, it was all worth it, I think. I learned a lot from it.
What was one of the things that really helped you continue to fight? Because that's the thing. Like you just don't know it's going to work. And you're like, this is a waste of time. But how did you convince yourself that it wasn't a waste of time, that there was always a chance for you to get through this?
When we talked earlier about tribes, I'm lucky to have had 64 years of tribes, family, friends, students, work friends, you name it. Other than "you saw me" as the number one comment by students, I heard, "I'm not ready to lose you yet. We got more to do. We got more to talk about. I still need your help advising me on this. You're like my bonus dad. You're like my bonus friend." My buddies would tell me, "No, man, you've got more books than you. We've got trips to take. I'm not going to wake up one day and not be able to ask you advice. Just I'm not ready for it." So I wasn't fighting for me. I've got a daughter. I've got 3 grandkids. And that's all kind of hokey and all that. But you do think about those things. But in the end, I think a lot of it was because other people, there's nothing heroic about what I did. I survived. That's a pretty low common denominator, I think. I think it's how I handled the surviving that I'm kind of proud of. But there's other people much more noble, smarter, more meaningful to me that died from similar type cancers. I just happened to survive. I don't know that it's from will or willpower. I'm not sure that it is. I got lucky. They picked me because I was 60 and in great shape and because I was willing to do this stupid, unique surgery and I was willing to die. So maybe, if anything, that's what kept me alive, was just my stupidity not to know better, if anything, which I think a lot of people, if they get to know me well enough, will tell you is true.
Well, we're all blessed to have you, brother. And
I'm glad to still be here.
That's an incredible story. And I can't think of all. I know me personally, you and your fight inspired me. And I can't imagine all the people that you've impacted with this stage of your life and what you got ahead.
Yes. I'm only 64 and I'm back now. It's a new normal. When I got the cancer, I was still very active. Right now, I'm like an old man. It's a new normal and I've got all my faculties and I can get around and I can do things. I can't wait to see what the next 50 years are like. I'm excited.
Well, I got something for you that's going to be one of the hardest things you've ever done.
All right.
Because we're going to do some rapid fire learning here.
Let's do it.
I'm going to give you 7 different places, persons, things, and you got to tell me one thing that you learned from it. And you only got 1 sentence.
All right.
All right?
Okay.
Okay. Here we go. Bear encounters.
I learned that I needed to be faster than the buddy next to me.
I've heard that one before.
Yeah, I stole that one.
Needles.
I could go another 64 years and never see another needle. I'll tell you that. I never got over the fear, by the way. No.
Amy.
We're looking at Spain when she retires. We're going over this summer to look at Spain to retire. Now, what kind of partner does that tell you she is, that I'm going to get to live my bucket list by living in Spain in retirement? Maybe this is a second place, but maybe full time. That's the kind of person she is.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Tuesdays with Maury.
It's okay to live with purpose, but it's also okay to die with purpose.
Luis Mayra.
That crazy bastard. You know, I did learn a lot about him on how to be a reporter, how to work with media, how to interview celebrities. He was with me when I went to Puerto Rico and interviewed Jose Canseco and Ricky Martin and all those Hispanic celebrities, and he taught me a lot.
Paparazzi.
I'm guessing by paparazzi, you mean the coffee house that my students started and ran for 8 years. It changed over those 8 years. And it was one of the reinforcers that taught me that if you get out of their way, they'll be able to do it. Stay out of their way.
Nice.
Let them fail.
Last one is Via Vidal.
My favorite place on earth. It's an ancient caldera, a collapsed volcano, verdant meadows, blue ribbon waters, full of red Rio Grande cutthroat trout, where I go to rediscover myself every few months.
That's a pretty valuable place.
It's a pretty valuable place. It's Sanctuary, which is also the name of my new novel.
Mark, you've been incredibly entertaining, incredibly generous with your time. Let me ask you for some advice before we wind things up. Say if somebody's listening today, right, and they've received either recent news or been receiving news over years that they're not smart enough, their body's not strong enough, they're not experienced enough, or they don't have enough money to do what they really want to do. What's something that person could do that would make you proud of them?
Wow. Everybody's an individual, so I need to talk to this person. I need to build another symbiotic relationship with this person because I don't know what their real dreams are and why they don't believe in themselves because they should. Intelligence isn't a factor for anything. Everybody can do these things. Maybe you can't do it at Rebus Wortham's level. Maybe you can't do it at Mitch Albom's level, but you can do it, whatever the it thing is you want to do. Maybe it's just become a better you. And I found that the way that I've always helped people become a better you is by listening to yourself. We go through life and we never listen. We listen to everybody else. We don't listen to ourselves. And if you sit down and really listen and talk to yourself and figure out what has been holding you back, I don't care. You know what? I've had 20 books published and I never once cared about the 99 that said no. I only cared about the one that said yes. That's what you got to look for. Look for that one person that's going to say yes, the one company that's going to say yes. You are smart enough. You are good enough. You are brave enough. That's all you need. The other 99 then fall by the wayside. Failure is good.
Failure is your friend.
Yes.
Well, my friend, you have had more success than most people would have in a dozen lifetimes. And I measure that by the number of people who know your name, who would speak well of you and talk about how you've changed their life, self included. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. I know we're gonna spend some more time together. But thank you very much for sharing your journey with us. It's just getting started.
Just getting started.
Love you, my friend. Thanks
Love you.
thanks for sharing yourself with our listeners and everyone else over these years.
Can't wait to see you fishing someday with me real soon.
We're going to make that happen.
All right.
All right, buddy. Thanks a lot, Marcus.